Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us this Friday afternoon. We're going to get the webinar started in just a few minutes, just allowing for a few more people to sign in. So we'll be right back with you. Thanks. Hi, everyone. I think we're going to get started. Thank you for joining us this Friday afternoon for our webinar on legal and medical regarding the New York surrogacy law, IVF, and COVID-19. That sounds like a whole lot to cover, so we're going to get to it. So just some housekeeping to get started before we begin. So you're all on listen only mode, which means you can hear us, but we can't hear you. However, there's a control panel on the right of your screen, in which case you can type in questions. And at the end of this webinar, we're going to make sure that we have time to answer all of your questions. So at any point, you can type in a question and we will see to it at the end. Just so you know, we are recording this webinar, and if you can't stay on for the whole thing, a recorded copy will be sent to you in your email once it is complete. So who will you be hearing from today? So we have a panel of experts here to give you this information. So you'll be hearing a bit from Anthony Brown, who is an attorney based here in New York. He's a consultant for Circle Surrogacy and Egg Donation. He's also a New York-based attorney and a parent through surrogacy himself. And then later on in this discussion, you will hear from Dr. Daneshmand, who is an IVF physician from San Diego Fertility Center. And he's going to talk to you later on about his work both in San Diego and here in New York. And who am I? My name is Jen Rachman. I'm a social worker with Circle Surrogacy. And just a little bit about myself, I joined the team at Circle after I became a parent through Circle's program. I am a cancer survivor as well as a New York native, and I have an 8-year-old son through egg donation and surrogacy. I'm a social worker, and I'm here to act as a resource for those of you who live locally, to meet with you in person, to help you learn about our agency, to help you get whatever information I can possibly provide as you're getting your process started. I meet regularly with folks in New York City. At this time, obviously, we have moved into a virtual format, but that's okay. We can do the same information providing virtually for the time being. And once in Circle's program, I do a variety of programming to build community here in New York. So we do that through support groups, we do that through community events, family building events. So that's a little bit about myself. So what do you have in store for you today? Today's agenda. This webinar is pretty much divided into two parts. The first part, we're going to speak about the New York Surrogacy Law, the Child Parent Security Act, and what does this law do and when does it go into effect? What does this mean for our intended parents who live here as well as New York-based surrogates? We're going to talk about things like, can I become a parent now in New York? And then we're going to go through some frequently asked questions regarding the Act. And in part two, you will hear more so about the medical and financial pieces of this process here in New York. So you'll go through a quick overview of IVF and surrogacy in New York, San Diego Fertility's New York-based office, and how we've seen COVID-19. For those of you who are considering surrogacy in New York, what type of impact have we seen this pandemic have on the process itself? We're also going to give you some general information about the financing program that we have here at Circle, and then how to go about meeting with us after this webinar is over. And our last piece will be time for Q&A. So to get started on what is this piece of legislation that just recently passed here in New York called the Child Parent Security Act. So for those who might not know this information, I think what's important to know is that there's no federal law for surrogacy. Every state gets to determine what are their viewpoints on this process and create a law as to what suits each individual state. And most of the United States has been surrogacy friendly for some time. New York happened to remain one of, I'd say, 2 to 3 states that the laws are majority not favorable up until this law changed. So the Child Parent Security Act, what does this law do? So this law passing will finally make surrogacy legal in the Empire State. It basically means now that surrogacy contracts can be enforceable. Prior to this law passing, surrogacy was only allowed if it was voluntary, non-compensated surrogacy. So say you had a family member or a friend able to be your carrier without compensation, that was allowed. Now we can also do compensated surrogacy. So surrogacy will have the most comprehensive set of protections compared to any state for both surrogates and intended parents. The law is very comprehensive and definitely offers what we feel, compared to other states, a lot of protections for both parties. It gives intended parents state-of-the-art law that protects all families that rely on medical advances, such as in vitro fertilization or gestational surrogacy, to have children. So when does it go into effect? And I have to admit, I was a little disappointed when I learned it was so far out. However, we're very excited to say that it will start in February of 2021, which is exactly when our women of New York can become gestational carriers. So what does this mean for our intended parents? So for intended parents who use third-party reproduction to conceive, when you have a legal relationship, you're able to secure a legal relationship with your child from birth. And Anthony Brown, who's our attorney, is going to get a little bit more into this in a bit, but basically just means that your surrogacy agreement is now recognized and you are able to be assigned parentage from birth. It legalizes compensation for gestational surrogacy agreements, and it becomes a simpler process for securing parenthood for the non-biological parent. It ends legal uncertainty for single intended mothers, lesbian couples who use a known or an anonymous sperm donor. When can I start a surrogacy journey? Now, if I live in New York. So we've had intended parents from New York ever since Circle began as an agency. We actually have a tremendous amount of community here in New York. And so you can start your surrogacy journey at any time that you feel comfortable and ready to do so. What it means, though, is that you must wait. If you would like a carrier to live in New York as well, you must wait until February of 2021 to sign your carrier agreement. So even though you can get your process started sooner, you can't officially make that agreement a legally binding agreement until February 2021. So we have a team here in New York. Circle, our main office is up in Boston, for those who don't know, but New York is a tremendous hub for us regarding a large community of intended parents that are based here. So we have a team that you'll meet with when you're ready to get your process started, to consult, to learn more about our process in more detail. You'll work with a dedicated lawyer at Circle to determine parentage in the state which your surrogate resides. So now it includes New York, but obviously we have surrogates that are throughout the US. So part of our role in the beginning is to help you understand the law, to understand what states work best for you to meet your legal needs. And so that's part of our role in the beginning, is to get to know what your needs are and help you make the best decision and find the best match, whether it's in New York or elsewhere for you. So I'm going to turn this presentation over now to Anthony Brown, who can introduce himself. So he can talk to you more about what does this mean for our surrogates. Tony, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Hi, thank you so much, Jen. Hello, everybody. This is Anthony Brown, and most of you know me as Tony. I am so excited to be a part of this call because I was honored to be in the group of attorneys in New York who helped to push this legislation through to make it actually happen. And before I go on to describe the legislation, I want to give a little shout out back to Jen, because she also participated. She went to Albany and she shared her story with the legislators there, which I think really made a difference. So it was a team effort to get here, and I'm so excited and proud to be able to share this with you. I want to start with one of the most distinguishing provisions in the surrogacy law, something that really does distinguish it from other states' laws, and that's something called the Surrogates Bill of Rights. The Surrogates Bill of Rights is a list of requirements that surrogates will have that really strive to make this one of the most ethical surrogacy laws in the country. In the Surrogates Bill of Rights, it states that surrogates will have the right to make all health and welfare decisions regarding themselves and their pregnancy. And in New York now, this also includes regarding the termination of the pregnancy. This is something that I always talk about at consultations, that you will have, before you sign with your surrogate, have the opportunity to, have a conversation with them, particularly about this. And so that you are going to be on the same page with your surrogate before you sign your carrier agreement. But in the Surrogates Bill of Rights, it specifically gives the surrogate the ability to terminate the pregnancy if she chooses, certainly if there's any issues regarding her health. In the Surrogates Bill of Rights, surrogates will also have independent legal counsel of their choosing, paid for by the intended parents. It's in the statute. Surrogates will have access to a health insurance policy paid for by the intended parents. And one of the ways that the law differs from other states is it provides that health insurance policy covers the carrier for 12 months after the birth of the child. So that's an extension from the industry standard of 3 months after the birth of the child. Surrogates are also going to have access to psychological counseling through the process and for 12 months after the pregnancy, as well as a minimum life insurance policy of $750,000. This is really one of the major changes, and this distinguishes New York from other states where the industry standard is a $250,000 life insurance policy. So this really is one of the most protective provisions for surrogates in the legislation. Also, one of the other very unique aspects of the legislation is a voluntary state registry for surrogates and for egg donors, so we can start collecting data on the number of times someone acts as a carrier, or the number of times someone donates eggs, and their health information. It is a voluntary state registry, but in the lobbying process for this, one of the questions that the opposition to the bill asked was, we have no data about this. We don't know what the long-term effects of egg donation are, or medications for surrogacy. So we built into the law this voluntary registry that will take place. So I want to move to a couple of frequently asked questions about the law. Jen, can you flip to the next slide for me, please? The way that this changes the current law is absolutely profound. New York used to criminalize compensated surrogacy. It wasn't just illegal, it was criminal to participate in a compensated surrogacy agreement. The Child Parent Security Act repealed that law, thankfully, and it now allows for, the way it's termed in the law, reasonable compensation above reimbursements. This law, it was a bit of a conversation with the people who were drafting the law and the people who were against the law to try to figure out what we could do about traditional surrogacy, which is when your egg donor is also your carrier. The current law, it still outlaws genetic compensated surrogacy or traditional surrogacy. The one sort of gray area about this question is whether it's a compassionate surrogacy, an uncompensated traditional surrogacy. Currently in New York, uncompensated surrogacies, whether traditional or gestational, are allowed. You just have to secure parentage afterwards with an adoption. And I imagine that's exactly what the parentage process would be like. The law takes effect specifically on February 15th, 2021. And I want to turn it back over to Jen to handle the last two questions on this slide, and then I'll be right back with you on the next one. Jen?
Thanks, Tony. So will Circle start advertising and recruiting New York carriers before February? The answer to that is yes. It is our plan to start advertising in New York State for carriers. You know, up until now, we weren't able to accept those applications. So our plan is to start advertising probably towards the latter part of the year, and start our screening process for our carriers, because that takes some time for the women to go through their screening steps. So we will start screening them prior to February, so that by the time the law goes into effect in February, we hope to have a nice pool of women ready to go into matching. Can New Yorkers now use their local IVF clinics rather than changing providers? Yes. So previously, what's important to know is that the clinics that were based here in New York City, you know, NYU, Cornell, Columbia, all these providers were able to create embryos, but they were not able to implant them into a gestational carrier. So intended parents had to move those embryos from those providers to a neighboring or another state that the laws are favorable. And so now that the laws will be changing, the nice part about that is that clinics will be able to do transfers when this law becomes effective. So then you'd be able to maintain the same provider that you used previously, and not have to move your embryos, which is a fantastic, wonderful addition with this law. So Tony, I'll turn it back over to you so you can continue the rest of our frequently asked questions.
Okay, absolutely. And I see that this one is actually answering a question that I believe Mohammed had submitted. Will the Child Parent Security Act be open to people from outside of New York? Currently, this was a big discussion when we were drafting the law and we were working with those opposed to the law. And currently, the way that the law reads, if you're in a couple, one of the intended parents has to be, at least one of the intended parents has to be a US citizen or a lawful permanent resident, meaning you have to have a green card. And they also have to be a resident of the state of New York for the last 6 months. So if you're an individual, then you have to be a US citizen or a lawful permanent resident and a resident of New York for the last 6 months. If you're in a couple, at least one of you has to be in that category. Also, I'll briefly go back. Libby asked a question about traditional surrogacy. Traditional surrogacy is when the egg donor is also the carrier. So it's a gestational surrogacy. You have a separate egg donor and a different person carries the child for you. That's gestational surrogacy. So how is the law different from other state surrogacy laws? It is the biggest difference is the Surrogates Bill of Rights. It stands up and holds New York to the highest ethical standards for surrogacy, and also begins to start that data collection that we need to get more information to see how the law can be changed in the future. For instance, if there is discussion that we may open the law up to intended parents from outside of New York. Currently, it is only available to New York intended parents. However, Anne Marie's question, if you live in New York, can you obtain a carrier outside of New York? Yes, you absolutely can. You're not limited to choosing a carrier in New York. And finally, one of the biggest boons to this law is how parentage is secured. Before, you would have a pre-birth order from the state where your carrier gave birth. Now, if your carrier gives birth in New York, you get a pre-birth order from New York. And that is really, really substantial. One of the benefits of that is if you do go through a surrogacy journey from another state, you have a pre-birth order from another state, you will now be assured that because New York has the protocols to create pre-birth orders, that pre-birth order will receive, your other state's pre-birth order will receive full faith and credit here in New York. So just for those of you who don't know what a pre-birth order is, the way the law sets out the timing, anytime after the transfer of the embryo to the carrier, this petition can be filed in either family court, Supreme Court, or surrogates court, depending on the county where you live. And the order will be issued prior to the birth of the child, stating that the intended parents are the legal parents of the child, that the surrogate and her spouse, if applicable, are not the parents of the child, and that the intended parents are going to go on the initial birth certificate issued by that New York hospital. So it's a really big change. And Jen mentioned earlier that it protects also lesbian couples or single females who want to use a known donor to get pregnant, because they can now go through this same parentage process in order to terminate the rights of their known sperm donor. Before, if you were a single woman and had a known sperm donor, you couldn't do that. But now under this law, you can do that. So now I'm going to pass, that's the end of the first part of the legal section, and I'm going to pass the baton over to Dr. Saeed Daneshmand. Saeed? Are you there?
I'm right here. Thank you, everyone, and thank you, Anthony, Tony, for your introduction. It's great to be with you today, and it's really great to celebrate together as a community the law that was just passed for the legalization of compensated surrogacy in New York. And my hat's off and my great appreciation and thanks and gratitude to all those who really battled for this, including people like Jen, who were able to talk about their own stories and really inspire people to change the laws that really discriminated against intended parents in New York. We have been coming to New York for many, many years. In fact, I've been seeing patients in New York City now for over 10 years. I have my New York medical license. And so last year, what we did was we opened up an office in New York, and that would be soon followed by having IVF lab services as well. So at this particular point, we're able to perform consultations, sperm freeze, analysis, blood work, and soon, probably sometime in early 2021, we'll also have our IVF lab in New York as well, so that we can then perform embryo transfers, create embryos in New York. So what I wanted to do is talk to you a little bit about the sort of the process, the surrogacy journey. I'd like to always divide it into 3 parts. If I can get the next slide. So this is a little bit of a picture, a photo of where our office is located in New York, and then the one in San Diego. And you're more than welcome to come to San Diego if you wish, sometimes, especially in the winter time, to escape some of the colder weather in New York. We'd love to welcome you at our center in San Diego. That's our main center. But now we also have a place in New York to see you as well. So in regards to the surrogacy journey, I always like to divide the surrogacy journey into 3 parts. You know, you have the sperm, you have the eggs, and you have your surrogate. So the first step of the process is to get an analysis of your sperm, looking at parameters such as concentration, motility, morphology. We do blood work for infectious diseases. And then we also do a genetic analysis to determine whether you carry any genetic recessive mutations. So for some of you that are using your own eggs in order to proceed with the surrogacy journey, we would like to get the genetic analysis for the egg provider and the sperm provider to make sure that there's genetic compatibility, meaning that you don't carry the same genetic mutations. These are recessive mutations, and these recessive mutations, if paired with the same mutation, can increase the chance of the recessive disease. These are diseases such as thalassemia, cystic fibrosis, and there will be about a 25% chance that the child would have that disease if the sperm carries the recessive mutation, and so does the egg. So getting a sperm analysis, blood work, for those of you who are providing your own eggs, getting an analysis of the egg quality, egg count, those are some of the things that we can initially do as diagnostic testing. The second step in the journey is to choose your egg donor. If you're going through an egg donor journey, as you know, there are Circle has a terrific egg donor program that is available to you. And we also have an egg donor program as well in conjunction with Circles. And what we look at for in an egg donor is we screen the egg donor for many different parameters, including egg quality and egg count. We do genetic screening on egg donors. We do psychological screening. We do urine toxicology screening for drugs and medications. We do general health parameter checks, general exams. I meet with every donor, do a general physical exam. We just want to make sure your donor is healthy, that she's genetically compatible with you, and that she has good quality eggs. Once you have chosen your egg donor, and once you have frozen your sperm, then the next step is to create the embryos. Your egg donor goes through hormonal stimulation of her ovaries, which take approximately about 10 to 12 days. During that time, she's taking medications to stimulate her ovaries to mature and develop eggs. And we monitor those eggs and follicles every few days to ensure maturity. And typically about 10 to 11 days after the start of the medications, the eggs become mature, and then we stop her medications and we retrieve her eggs non-surgically approximately 2 days later. Once the eggs are retrieved, then what we do is we individually select the best quality sperm and individually inject it inside each egg. Now, having your sperm analysis prior to this is really important because there are some men who have abnormal sperm parameters, in particular, something called morphology, which is the shape of the sperm. So if we know that beforehand, then we actually do a 2-step procedure for sperm selection. The initial step is like an obstacle course for the sperm. And those sperm that actually finish and complete the obstacle course are going to have the best DNA quality. And so we take those sperm, and from those sperm, we individually pick the best quality sperm to inject inside the eggs. That's called a Zymote protocol. And I always review your sperm analysis to determine whether you are a good candidate for the Zymote protocol and whether that's going to help maximize sperm quality for you to maximize embryo quality. So I wanted to go to the slide with the embryos and show you what happens after the eggs are fertilized. And you see that on day 1, what we do is we confirm fertilization of the eggs. by looking at the 2 nuclei or pronuclei inside the egg, and that's day 1. And then what happens is the embryo starts dividing into 2 cells, into 4, into 8, and you'll see on day 3, for example, it's an 8 cell stage embryo, divides further to 16, 32, until it reaches, after 5 to 6 days, a stage called the blastocyst. Now, at the blastocyst stage, there are 2 ways in which we can assess the quality of the embryo. One is by a classification system, and we've published many papers on the classification and grading system of embryos, and that's available to you if you wanted to go to pubmed.com. In fact, many fertility centers around the country and around the world use our classification system, and that's based on cell quality, the quality of the cells of the embryo. The grade and the quality of the embryo will give us a very good idea as to the chance of pregnancy and chance of a delivery. The second way in which we assess embryos is through a test called PGT, pre-implantation genetic testing. And that's when we take a few cells from the outer edge of the embryo, that's called a biopsy. And we take those cells and we analyze them for chromosomal abnormalities. These chromosomal abnormalities are abnormalities such as Down syndrome, Turner syndrome, chromosomal copy abnormalities that are typically related to egg quality. Because you're using an egg donor, and if you are using an egg donor, then the risk of chromosomal abnormalities is low. If you're using an egg donor, or you're providing your own eggs and you are 35 years of age and older, then this test becomes more important because the risk of chromosomal abnormalities and disorders such as Down syndrome increases and advances with advancing age of the egg provider. Once we do the biopsy, the embryos are frozen. And you can see this hatching blastocyst, because once we do transfer the embryo, the next step is for the embryo to hatch out of its shell and start attaching to the uterus. Now, may I have the next slide, please? We talked a little bit about what are the steps that you can do now. Some fertility centers right now are closed. Some have sort of reduced their hours and services during this COVID-19 pandemic. Certainly some of the steps that you can take now are your sperm analysis and blood work, your genetic analysis. In fact, we can send you genetic recessive mutation saliva test kits. Those are sent to you and mailed to you, and you provide saliva and you send it back to the Genetics Institute, and within 2 to 3 weeks, we'll have your genetic recessive mutation analysis. Then we can compare those recessive mutations that you carry with your egg donor to ensure genetic compatibility. And then also you can review egg donor profiles with Circle's egg donor database, with our egg donor database, and start thinking about your egg donor. Throughout this whole journey, my team and I, and Circle's team is always available to you for questions, concerns. In fact, all of you will have my cell phone. You can text me, you can call me. I just want to make sure that I'm with you throughout this whole journey until you become parents. Now, we do a great deal of research, and we've published many, many papers over the years. We continue to do research. In fact, I wanted to touch base on one aspect of our latest research. As you know, as we talked about, in order to assess the chromosomes of the embryo at this particular stage, we have to do a biopsy. So we have to take a few cells from the outer edge of the embryo. Our current research and sort of the new frontier in genetic screening of embryos is not touching the embryo and analyzing the DNA that the embryo sheds into that culture media, into the fluid where it grows, taking that DNA and analyzing it, and that way we don't have to do a biopsy of the embryo. So our current research involves, which is called non-invasive genetic screening. We're taking the DNA from the media fluid, and we can get the next slide, and we're analyzing the DNA from what we call the spent culture media. And that way we can then eliminate the biopsy in the future as a way in which to analyze the chromosomes of the embryo. We think that that's somewhere between 6 months to a year away. In fact, we have a great research grant. We're in a pool of companies that applied for a research grant from a major genetics company, and we actually won the grant. And so now we're going to move forward starting in May with further studies. And so hopefully sometime towards the end of the year, we'll be able to initiate the new genetic analysis technique. There are also several other participating centers worldwide. There's 8 in total. So we can pool our studies, and what we're doing is we're correlating the biopsy numbers and biopsy results with the non-invasive, the DNA results. And if we get a good correlation, we can eliminate the biopsy. So just a little bit of talk about the surrogacy journey. Now, I want to address some of your concerns, and that is in regards to COVID-19 and some of the risks essentially to address. Many intended parents, and many of those intended parents who are now expecting and their surrogates are pregnant right now, have concerns about COVID-19. So I wanted to address a few of those concerns based on the latest research and the latest studies. In fact, one of the latest research studies just came out yesterday in regards to a medication that seems to be very effective, especially in severe cases of COVID-19. There are now several studies that have addressed the issue of vertical transmission, meaning that the transmission of the virus when a woman is pregnant to the fetus by the placenta. And at this particular point, based on research, the best of which have come from Wuhan University, where they studied patients who were admitted with COVID-19, severe cases of COVID-19 pneumonia where they needed respiratory help. And what they did was they looked at amniotic fluid, cord blood, and once the babies were born, they took swabs from nasal passages and the oral cavity for evidence of the virus. And what they found was there was no evidence of the virus in the amniotic fluid, in the cord blood, or with the newborns. So that gave us some reassurance, although larger studies are needed, and I'm certain that currently there are many studies that are ongoing, but at least so far, based on available studies, we don't have any evidence of vertical transmission. The other issue is, and concern is, that many other epidemics and pandemics, for example, such as the flu, have been harder on patients who are pregnant. And so the question right now is, are pregnant women or pregnant surrogates more prone to the virus? And we have evidence that that's not the case. It looks like the attack rate, the infection rate among pregnant women is the same as the general population. So it appears that the pregnant women are no more likely than anyone else to be infected with the virus or to have severe symptoms, which is again reassuring, but we need further studies to corroborate that. Next slide. The other issue is that there is no evidence based on this particular virus, coronavirus, based on other viruses, other types of coronaviruses, and other viruses such as a hepatitis virus, that there's any evidence of transmission of the virus via sperm, eggs, or embryos. So when we're creating embryos via sperm and eggs, there are stringent washing techniques that are in place with the fertility centers, and those particular stringent techniques eliminate the risk of any virus entering the egg, the sperm, and subsequently the embryo. So we know that in terms of an embryo creation standpoint, there's no risk of transmission of virus. So some reassuring news in regards to pregnancy, in regards to IVF and COVID-19. We had some really good news yesterday. In fact, the study has not been published yet, but there are about roughly 40 different clinical trials currently for a medication called remdesivir, which is an antiviral medication. And what it does, it prevents the replication of the virus. And these studies are ongoing, and there are two studies there are two clinical sites right now, one at the University of California in Davis, and another one in Chicago, University of Chicago. And both of those clinical trials, there were some initial reports, and yesterday actually there was a video conference meeting of the head of the trial at the University of Chicago with other colleagues that was just released. And it appears that the medication, the antiviral medication, has a profound positive impact in cases of severe COVID-19. There were about 125 severe cases at the University of Chicago, and 113 out of the 125 who were treated with remdesivir were taken off the ventilator, had rapid resolution of their fevers, and within about 7 days of initiating therapy were actually discharged from the hospital. So that's some great news and very sort of a great deal of optimism that was generated last night from sort of the initial reports. Now, having said that, there are two factors always to consider. Number one, these particular studies did not have a control arm, meaning that there wasn't a placebo group to compare it with. Whilst it's very unlikely that these patients suddenly had a resolution of their fevers and did not need respiratory support, we can't rule out a spontaneous resolution because there was no control arm. And the other issue is there are 38 other sites that currently in clinical trials, and we need to wait for a pooling of all that data. The manufacturer of the medication, Gilead Sciences, has told us that the reports, the studies will be collated, and we should have collated results to really better determine the efficacy of this medication by the end of April. I have been keeping everyone updated on my Facebook site and just wrote an article that's available to you on the latest studies on COVID-19 in regards to pregnancy and IVF. And that's available by on Facebook, on Twitter as well. I think I've spoken a great deal, and sorry to take too much time, but just wanted to update you on sort of the latest findings, latest research and studies on COVID-19. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Saeed. It's such an uncertain time right now, and it's really good to hear some good news about that. I do want to, before we answer some questions, I want to tell you about something that we're doing at Circle that sort of ties into this. I know one of the effects of the COVID-19 virus has been, a severe economic drain on all of us. One of the things that Circle has done right now is we have instituted the first ever financing plan that is tied directly to surrogacy and egg donation. We offer this plan through our partner Origin Finance. It is exclusive to Circle Surrogacy, and what it does is it allows qualified intended parents to borrow $65,000 of the cost of their journey and choose to pay that off in either a 3-year or a 6-year period. The program itself, if you qualify and you receive the loan, the funds go automatically into your escrow account. There's nothing else that you need to do. And there is also, I want to mention, no penalty. So for instance, if you only need $40,000 of financing, you can get the $65,000 loan, immediately pay $25,000 back the next day, and you won't be charged a penalty or interest on that money that you've paid back. So there is no penalty for prepayment. The qualifications for this new program, the intended parents must be a part of our Journey Protection Guarantee program. And if you have questions about this, Jen is going to talk at the very end about how you can speak with us in a consultation format, and we can go through this in very granular detail. But essentially, our Journey Protection Guarantee program is it's basically a guaranteed birth program. You pay a premium of $10,000, and you get essentially unlimited transfers until you have a child. So you have to be a part of that program to take advantage of the financing program. You can do it either as a surrogacy only client or a surrogacy and egg donation client. The applicants have to be US citizens, including any co-signers. We do allow for co-signers for the loans. The IPs need to reside in one of the eligible states. New York is one of those eligible states. Colorado, Connecticut, Florida, Georgia, Illinois, Massachusetts, New Jersey, North Carolina, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Texas, Virginia, and Washington, D.C. we currently cover. We will soon be covering California as well. And you also have to meet the applicable criteria, which includes a high credit score. So I'm gonna put this page up there. I'm not gonna talk very much about this. This page tells you about what the monthly payments are if you choose a 3-year plan or a 6-year plan, and it gives you the interest rate. But I do want to address some questions that have come in about the effect of the New York law on the costs in this process. We see that the way the law is drafted, there essentially are 3 categories that might increase the costs of your surrogacy journey. One of them is the $750,000 life insurance policy, as opposed to the $250,000 life insurance policy. One is the 12 months post-birth health insurance requirement. And the other is the mental health and legal counseling requirement that is open to surrogates for 1 year after the birth. Right now, we don't know exactly what the increase in costs will be. We estimate them to be possibly between $7,000 and $15,000, but this is very preliminary and we're still working through some of these details. But I did want to address that for some people who have asked whether the costs may be higher. Certainly, New York couples do not have to work with New York surrogates. You can work with a surrogate from another state if you choose. But I do want to go to the next slide and tell you about some of the reasons why you may want to work in New York, where some of the benefits are here, and certainly some of the benefits for working with Circle. Circle is the most successful surrogacy agency with a success rate of 99.3%. That basically means in 99.3% of the intended parents that we work with that go up to 3 transfers, they go home with a child. Our success rate is one of the things that we are most proud about. Also in New York, you have a dedicated team with myself and with Jen. We are both parents through surrogacy, through the Circle program. My husband and I, we have a son who's 10 years old. We went through this process 13 years ago. But there is a dedicated team to support our New York intended parents. One of the other reasons that New York may be a good fit for you is that your clinic may now be in New York. We work with the best clinics, including San Diego Fertility, all over the country. But now we will be able to work with some of the New York clinics that have not been able to help us in the past. So that may actually also be a potential cost saving for you as far as travel is concerned, as well as the fact of having a local surrogate. Having a local surrogate go to a local clinic may cut down on the travel costs considerably. Circle works with surrogates from all over, though. Like I said, you don't have to work with surrogates in New York, but starting in February 2021, you will be able to. And we work with parents of all backgrounds: single, married, domestic partnered, coupled, gay, straight, international, domestic. We have over 25 years of experience, and that experience really will come to bear in getting us set up to start with our New York program. And also, we do have a very flexible consultation schedule, especially now that we're doing a lot of virtual consultations. So I think that if you have questions that we don't answer in this webinar, and you haven't already had a consultation with us, it may be a good idea to connect with Jen and to set something up where we can really focus on your specific situation and answer your specific questions. Also, New York, some of the other benefits of being in New York may be that you will have a quicker matching time, because there may be fewer intended parents who will be in that pool of intended parents that need to be matched. One other potential cost savings issue now is ACA plans. ACA health insurance plans in New York previously would not allow for surrogacy coverage in another state, but they may allow for surrogacy coverage in New York. And that coupled with the potential travel savings if everyone is local, I think that may actually mitigate some of the extra costs that could be involved. So now I'm going to pass it back over to Jen, and then we'll take some questions. Jen?
Thanks, Tony. So you can see here the slide that we have up here just gives some information about how to set up consultations, both with our team at Circle as well as with Dr. Daneshmand's team for San Diego Fertility Center. Obviously, at this point, we've moved to a virtual format. I'm hopeful that in a few months we'll get back to actually being able to sit down and meet face-to-face. But for the interim, we do have a very flexible, we offer weekends and evenings. If you want to set up a consultation with us, please feel free to email me. We are very adaptable at this time and happy to meet with you and talk to you about your individual specific needs. So that concludes our webinar presentation. I'd like us to spend some time now going through some questions that have been presented to us. So I'll start with someone who says, I live in New York. Can I obtain a surrogate from another state so I don't have to wait until February 2021? So yes, of course, you know, we are always matching intended parents with surrogates from other locations. And part of our consultation discussion, we would talk about your own specific matching needs. And if you do have a location preference, so even if it isn't, you know, specifically New York, but you say, you know, Northeast or East Coast or, you know, whatever your own preferences are, or if you keep yourselves open to deciding, you know, whoever's the right fit, regardless of location. I know when I first came to Circle, I said, you know, I really would like someone close, and my surrogate is from Utah, so not so close to New York. But I will say that she was absolutely the right fit for us and didn't find the location difference to be difficult to navigate with good communication. So we would talk about that as well. What is going to make you most comfortable in your own surrogacy? So let's field some other questions here. I think, Tony, I'm going to let you take this one from Mohammed regarding international surrogacy intended parents who are here in New York.
Yes, I'm going to try to, Mohammed, asked a few questions. Some are directed toward that I can answer, and some I think we may pass off to Dr. Daneshmand. But for international clients, if you are an individual, under the current law, you would have to be a green card holder. If you're not a green card holder, you would not be eligible to be matched with a New York surrogate. That being said, you don't have to be matched with a New York surrogate. And you can, what my suggestion to you is to email us about a consultation. And I believe, Jen, that your email address is incorrect on the form. I think Jen's email address is jrachman@Circle Surrogacy, as opposed to J. Achman at Circle Surrogacy. I just want to get that out because that's probably going to be your primary point of contact, is with J. Rachman at Circle Surrogacy. Mohammed, you had also asked, can an intended single parent apply for residency based on their pregnancy? The answer to that question is incredibly complicated and largely dependent upon federal interpretation of immigration laws. Under the current administration, I don't think that would be possible at all. If the administration changes and immigration law interpretation does change, then you that may be an option for you. But at this point in time, I do not believe that it is. Let me see if there are any other questions from you. My best advice to you would be to set up a consultation with us so that we can talk about your individual situation, because there are other states that do not have these requirements for the intended parent, that you may qualify to go through the journey with your current immigration status. So I think I'll hand it back over to you, Jen, and we'll take some more questions.
Yeah, thanks, Tony. And thank you for pointing out the email address correction. I'm going to actually send some information out in a follow-up email, so you'll have my contact information thereafter. So we have a question that says, will the law affect IVF coverage for gay males in any way? Are there any developments on this issue? Tony, can you speak to that? Is there any change there in IVF coverage for gay males?
That's a really good question, because in January, a new IVF coverage law just went into effect that covers 3 cycles, 3 embryo transfers, either fresh or frozen embryo transfers. It also covers egg freezing and embryo freezing. The problem with this law is the way that it defines infertility. It defines infertility as the inability to conceive or impregnate someone after 12 months of unprotected sexual intercourse, or for women over 35, 6 months. That will qualify lesbian couples, and it will qualify heterosexual couples, but gay male couples do not qualify for this. There is a movement now to try to redefine infertility to include what's called social infertility, which essentially is the inability to impregnate or conceive with your partner. However, what I suggest that you do is check in with your employer, because some of the larger, if you work for a larger employer who has a more perhaps robust benefits program, you may be able to get some kind of either reimbursement or some kind of benefit that can mitigate the costs of IVF. But under the law that passed and went into effect in January, it does not cover us as gay men. We're working on it, but currently it doesn't, unfortunately.
That is unfortunate. I'm hopeful that that will change at some point as well. And it's another part of that question is, it seems like the law offers significant protection to surrogates at the expense of the intended parents. What are the benefits for intended parents to choose a surrogate in New York given these extra costs? I mean, my personal viewpoint on that is that yes, there are going to be additional protections in place for the carriers that will bring up some of the costs of your process. However, your kind of trade-off in that is that you have a woman that lives closer to you potentially than others, and are able to use hopefully medical providers that provide services here, and kind of keeping everything in state is the nice benefit to that. Tony, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think that one of the other significant benefits is that you probably will be matching much quicker, because we're going to have more surrogates available for only New York-based intended parents. That, and the potential savings with a local clinic and possibly with your health insurance program, they may be a benefit. I personally, my opinion about what the best benefit is that you're going to be closer to your carrier during the pregnancy. I remember during my husband's and my pregnancy, I really missed being with Shannon, our surrogate. She was in North Carolina. And while New York is a big state, I think it's going to be a good bet that you're going to be a lot closer to your carrier. So I think the cost factors and the reality of your journey factors may balance out. It may weigh more on the side of costs, but it's going to ultimately be, up to you to decide what is more important in the journey, with the understanding that costs certainly are a consideration.
And the last part of that question is, will surrogacy be risky in New York initially due to the lack of New York State New York State law precedent? Tony, do you want to speak on that, Tony?
Yes, thank you. That is a very good question. The difference between there's certain differences in the way that states approach their surrogacy laws. Some laws will have a statutory base for the gestational carrier agreement to be upheld, and some will have a case law base. having a statutory base is the strongest foundation, because if there are any disputes in the agreement, the statute provides for how to handle those disputes. So you're not going to be, it's not, you know, while if there are cases that are litigating provisions in a gestational carrier agreement, you have the weight of the statute behind you. If you were in a state that was a case law based state, I would say then it's going to be up to a potentially broader interpretation. But it's a very good question, and we are in uncharted waters right now. However, the law itself is very comprehensive, and it provides for disputes, for mediation, and it's very clear on what needs to be in the agreement for it to be enforceable. So I'm less concerned about those litigation issues coming up. The one concern that I have, which really isn't a concern, is that the law does state that there need to be certain regulations promulgated by the Commissioner of Health, and that's going to be more towards the medical end. I want to make sure that those come in on time before February 15th, before the law takes place. But that's an excellent question. Thank you for asking.
Thank you, Tony. Now we have a question for Dr. Daneshmand. Mohammed says, I am Asian with different traits, but what if I want certain traits in my child, such as a tall height and blonde hair? This is very important. Please answer if this is possible. Dr. Daneshmand, can you speak to that? Are you there?
Oh, perfect. Thanks, Jen. Yes, absolutely. So the question was whether if you're Asian, for example, how do you go about choosing the ideal egg donor?
Well, the question was really specifically if you want certain traits for your child to have, such as being tall or having blonde hair. Is this possible?
So, you know, there are some traits that are more dominant than others. For example, eye color, hair color. And that's something certainly we can discuss and will support you during the process of finding your egg donor. In regards to height, typically on the average height of the egg donor and your height will be the ultimate height of your children. But there are some nuances there, because unfortunately with all of these particular genes, with that code for example, height or other physical characteristics, it's not sort of a one-to-one phenomenon. In other words, it's possible, for example, that if you have some ancestry, if your grandparents, if your parents, for example, there are some tall genes on those sides that despite the fact that you may not be as tall, that could be transmitted to your child. So, but on average, there's a formula for height in regards to the height of your egg donor and yourself. It's roughly an average of the two. And there are some traits that are more dominant in terms of eye color, hair color. But again, it's not an absolute science, because there are many factors, many genes that are have an interplay, and that may cause a difference in color of the eyes or for example, of the hair, despite the fact that you've chosen a particular egg donor.
Thank you, Dr. D. Next question from Libby. Can the contracts be adjusted to have the surrogate waive their right to determine termination to the intended parents, or would New York State allow for that?
Yeah, under the law, the way it is written with the Surrogates Bill of Rights, this was one of the big issues that went back and forth with those proponents of the bill and the opponents of the bill. And under the legislation as it's drafted, a surrogate would not be able to waive that right with direct language. I believe that there can be language that would allow for the intended parents and the surrogates to come to that conclusion together. However, ultimately, there would be a statement that the final decision would be made by the surrogate. and I just want to caution you, Libby, that if a agreement was drafted that had that waiver in it, that may make the agreement invalid for the purposes of establishing parentage. So it is important that, at least right now, until if certain amendments are made to the statute, and the answer to your question would be there could not be an outright waiver of that right.
Thank you, Tony. And question from Carissa, when will you be accepting applications for IEPs to match with a surrogate? While we accept IEPs ongoingly. If you mean specifically regarding New York, you have a decision to make if you wanted to get signed up and get on that list for when we're able to then match you at the beginning of the new year. Do you work on a wait list basis? When would that open? So when you apply to Circle, there is always a period of time in which you're waiting a match. And it's really based on your own specific matching needs. So generally speaking, we would say if you're planning to try for a singleton, you'd expect the match time to be somewhere around 3 to 5 months, depending on what your needs are, what your clinic's needs are. So we take all that into consideration when we consider your match time. And when we talk to you at your consultation, we can give you kind of more of a precise time. So for those people who are thinking, I would like to have a New York-based carrier. Is there a way for us to kind of get started sooner? I would certainly say yes, because you're going to have that period of time awaiting a match regardless. So if come the end of this year, you say, I want to get started to get on the match list to plan for our New York match when the law becomes enforceable, we could certainly help you plan for that. Do the agency fees have to be paid before a match is made, or is payment due once you're matched? Tony, can you speak a little bit about the payment structure in terms of when the payments are due?
Yes, absolutely. So, when you have a consultation with us, we'll go into this into much more detail. There are essentially, if you're in the egg donor program, there are 3 payment cycles to be made. One payment you make when you sign up with us, which does cover the agency fee. One payment when you match with your egg donor, and then one payment when you match with your carrier. So the payments are stretched out over a period of time, but the agency fee is taken when you sign your agreement for services with Circle. We also have a very detailed refundable schedule. If you were to sign on with us and then something happened and needed to stop working with us, depending on where you are in the journey, large, medium to small portions of what you have paid will be refunded to you. And we can go through that specifically with you at a consultation. But yes, the agency fees are taken prior to the match. And the reason being that a lot of work goes on our part to do the screening for our carriers and to make sure that they meet all of our requirements to be carriers. So yes, the agency fees are paid prior to the match.
Great. And you can also find all of our costs listed on our website. Our cost sheets are right there easily for you to take a look at ahead of time. Next question is, can a single intended parent opt for both an egg and a sperm donor? This question's from Mohammed. So yes, the answer to that is you can use both, what we call double donor, to create embryos. However, I think it's important to know that there are certain states that this is not as supported as others. So it does limit the states in which your carrier can be from when you do not have a genetic tie to your child. Tony, did you want to add anything to that?
No, you covered that one. That's fine.
Okay. If I already have donated embryos, would Circle assist in finding me a gestational carrier? Yes. yes, we would absolutely, we do have folks working with donated embryos, and we can certainly help you find a gestational carrier. Do both intended parents need to have high credit scores? I believe it depends on how you're applying for the loan itself. Tony, can you add to that?
Yes, you can apply together, you can apply individually, and you can apply with a co-signer. So if you are interested, we can put you in touch with the financing arm, with Origin Financing, and they can give you very specific information about that. If you want to email Jen or myself, J. Rachman at Circle Surrogacy or A. Brown at Circle Surrogacy, we can put you in touch with them so they can give you more specific information. And also I can send you a more specific sort of explanation of the financing program.
Thanks, Tony. Roughly how long does it take starting the process with Circle to the birth of your child? A question from Valerie. Great question. We generally say the process takes about 18 months on average from the time you officially begin to birth of baby. Now, if you're intending to work with a New York-based carrier starting February, obviously that might stretch your time because it's still quite a ways away to February. But generally speaking, about a year and a half is what you should plan for. Any insight as to why the law is not taking effect until 2021? A question from Brooke. Tony, do you know why? I don't know the
Yes.
answer to that.
Yes, the answer is because there are certain provisions in the law that require the Commissioner of the Department of Health of New York to issue certain regulations. Some of them include creating a template for informed consent for both carriers and egg donors. And I believe what the reason why there is this delay is because there's a bureaucratic process that has to take place to get the regulations from the Commissioner of Health in place. That's the reason why.
Great. Rebecca says, I'm wondering if there have been conversations around compensation. I'm wondering if that is asking regarding surrogacy compensation for New York-based carriers. Tony, can you speak to that?
Absolutely. The way that the legislation defines compensation, which is really critical, and it was something that went back and forth for a long time because we really wanted to make sure that compensation was not, that it was framed correctly. That compensation is based on the dedication to the process that the carrier makes, that the disruption of her life, the risks that she takes in pregnancy, that it's not an employer-employee situation. So there were lots of conversations about it, and I'm very happy to report that the definition that is in the actual statute is exactly what we discussed. Now, if your question is about how much the compensation would be, the answer is the statute says reasonable compensation. And sort of the industry standard for reasonable compensation has been a base fee of $30,000. But that is not included in this language of the statute.
Thank you, Tony. A question from Conrad. I already have an egg donor selected. She lives in Mexico City. What is the current law / restrictions on border crossing? And he's working with San Diego Fertility Center currently. I don't know, Tony or Dr. Daneshmand want to chime in on that.
Yeah, I'll do very briefly, but then I want to let Saeed discuss it because I think Saeed probably knows this a little bit better than I do. Currently, the border restrictions are pretty onerous. Whether they change, they're onerous for a couple of reasons. One is because of COVID-19, but also because of the current immigration system. I am sure that Saeed has probably worked with situations like this before, so I want him to finish answering the question. I'm hopeful that once the COVID-19 crisis is over, that we will have a little bit more freedom as far as or less restrictions as far as having an egg donor from a different country. But Saeed, would you like to discuss this?
Sure. I think, in regards to, and Tony, as you mentioned, previously, there was really no restrictions on having an egg donor outside the US other than health parameters that we have to keep in mind. For example, a few years back, there was the issue with the Zika virus, and so we had to keep that in mind in regards to the timing of the egg retrieval. But Zika is now no longer really a significant concern. So the concern now is the travel restrictions that are in place. For many egg donors, if the egg donors don't live in the US, we can at least start by performing some of the diagnostic testing for them where they reside, working with local labs, local fertility clinics, colleagues, international colleagues, to at least get the testing done, for example, for egg quality, for genetic screening, infectious disease. And then once the travel restrictions are eased, then those particular egg donors can actually end up traveling to us. And oftentimes they come to us and stay here for about 2 weeks prior to their egg retrieval. So I think each case is individualized, and we work with our colleagues, reproductive attorneys at Circle, in order to find out what the best way is to have your egg donor travel to us. I think the antibody testing is also going to become very important in the near future, meaning that in order for us to know whether a patient has been exposed to COVID-19 and now has immunity, the really next step is widespread antibody testing. And the reason for that is because we know that if somebody has antibodies, and in particular a type of antibody called IgG, then that particular person is probably immune to COVID-19. And if they have IgG, they're no longer infectious. In other words, they can't infect someone else. And I think we can then begin to allow at least a group of people who are immune to kind of go back into whether they're workforce or school or for travel, because we have more confidence that we're not putting them at risk and we're not putting others at risk either. So I think antibody testing is going to be important. And in fact, the CDC and Dr. Fauci have mentioned a potential program in the future that will then allow people to have antibody testing and then be able to have more ease of travel and less restrictions, whether it's at work or school and in public.
Thank you, Dr. D. So the next question from Rebecca is, do you guys represent both IPs and surrogates? And as an IP, can we have our lawyer from outside the agency? So this is a great question. We do have a full legal team in-house at Circle and will represent the interest of the intended parents. So you'll be assigned as part of your team, you'll be assigned an attorney to do all of your legal work. Your carrier will also have an attorney working on her behalf, but will not be part of Circle's team. So even though you're paying for her legal services, it's not a conflict of interest in the sense that she will have her own separate outside counsel. And if you have your own attorney, I think where intended parents sometimes use their own counsel is reviewing the service agreement between you and our agency, because at that point you're not yet our clients. And so we have had people have their own attorneys review that on their behalf. So I would say at this point it's probably not too many that do so, but you certainly can. Tony, did you want to add to that, or did I cover all that?
No, you did that very well.
Okay, well, thank you. And Rebecca also asked, what is your turnaround time for finding a surrogate? So like I said earlier, Jen, at this point, we're saying generally about 3 to 5 months from the time that you begin to be matched with a carrier if you're doing a singleton. If you're planning to try for twins, match time is longer, can generally be about 6 to 8 months from the time that you begin. And Rebecca also asks, will you work with NYU Fertility Clinic? Absolutely. We will work with any clinic that it's your right to decide who your medical provider is. So whoever is the clinic that you're working with, that as long as NYU, and my assumption is NYU at this point is not doing transfers for carriers. They generally transfer their embryos out to another facility. But if you were to move forward after February with your carrier, then my assumption is NYU will be able to see you all the way through. It says, hello, Anthony. Says, Tony, this is for you. For separated singles that want to store semen for future conceiving process, will any coverage from health insurance, etc., give a single guy at 35 who wants to save their semen? What would it cost if it's not covered by insurance?
That's a good question, and the first part is whether insurance is going to cover that. It may cover it if there is a medical necessity to do it. If there isn't a medical necessity to do it, then I don't believe it's going to be covered, and it wouldn't be covered under the new law. As far as storing semen, Dr. Daneshmand may be able to answer this question, because I know it's different with each clinic. Dr. Daneshmand, do you want to chime in on this one?
Sure, Tony. Yes, I mean, we can certainly store sperm. We can freeze sperm for many, many years. In fact, we have frozen sperm for 20 years without any significant decrement in the quality of the sperm, and with successful pregnancies. So if you feel that there is a need to freeze your sperm at this particular point to preserve the quality of the sperm, and perhaps there are going to be some changes in your physical health, that you feel that storing sperm, or just based on age, typically younger men on average have slightly higher quality sperm, so we can certainly freeze sperm for the future. And I believe that if insurance covers, it doesn't cover anything, I believe the cost of doing the sperm freeze at our facility in New York, alongside the blood work that needs to go along with it, which is the FDA screening, and that's just a set of all the infectious disease testing that has to go to an FDA registered lab. I believe that the total cost is going to be about $1,500.
Thank you, Saeed. Next question from Anne-Marie. Does Circle have a list of women that are interested in being surrogates once the law passes? So not at this time, because we have not been accepting surrogate applications from New York at this time, but we will start opening that up later this year so that we can start having a reserve of women that are ready to go come February. She says she's just trying to get a sense to understand the wait time to match with someone, since there's no guarantee she'll conceive anyway. Well, that is correct, right? There's no, unfortunately, I wish I could say there's a guarantee in any part of this process, but I think when you're working with an agency like us at Circle, who can help you navigate the matching process. So the reason that there is a wait time, it's not as if there's a pool of women, even they go through a series of screening steps. And then we pair off who is the best fit for one another, and you go off into your process together. So there is always kind of this wait time to make sure that we're finding the right fit for you, because everyone's matching needs are different. And so we want to make sure that it is the best fit for you out of the women that are coming into the program in that time frame. So when we meet for consultation, I will get into a lot greater detail than this, but it is our intention to advertise and start taking surrogate applications. So when the law goes into effect, we do have women kind of ready to go and to move into the matching phase, hopefully right away. Next question is, I was born with no uterus, so I never had my period. The question is, how do I know if I have eggs? And is this for the doctor? So Dr. Daneshmand, can you speak a little bit about a woman who are born without a uterus? How do they assess their fertility?
Absolutely. So we can assess your fertility one of two ways. Number one, we can get some blood work on you and do some hormonal testing. And those hormonal testing essentially are estradiol levels, estrogen levels, FSH levels. FSH is a hormone that's secreted by the brain, which stimulates the ovaries to mature and develop an egg. So in cases where patients are born without a uterus, typically that doesn't affect the ovaries. Their ovaries are still present. They're still making eggs. The eggs are still being developed and ovulated. So we can assess that hormonally. The other way in which we can assess your fertility is by an ultrasound. We can do an ultrasound and take a look at your ovaries and actually assess the number of immature eggs in your ovaries. So with those two methods, we can assess both the number and the quality of the eggs in the ovaries. And if need be, in terms of going through an IVF cycle, then we look to your hormones to stimulate the ovaries to mature and develop multiple eggs and retrieve the eggs. So it's really no different than a regular IVF cycle. It's just that we don't have the menstrual cycle to sort of time the cycle, so that we have to then rely on hormonal parameters.
Thank you, Dr. D. Next question from Milt. If a surrogate terminates not due to health, how does that impact the financial situation prior to that and going forward? Tony, can you take this one?
Yeah, absolutely. This brings up sort of two, it's a two-pronged answer. Number one, Circle has one of the most thorough and stringent screening processes for surrogates. And this is going to be included in the psychological evaluation, in the support that the surrogate is offered, to really understand and to help her understand the impact that this surrogate's Bill of Rights and this termination provision will have on intended parents. Circle currently has two payment plans, and they're both fixed plans. The Journey Protection Guarantee, which I mentioned earlier, if you're a part of that plan and there's a termination, and if it's not due to health, but if it's due to, you know, the law in New York, you would have no other financial obligation to Circle. You may have a financial obligation to your clinic, depending on what kind of program you have with them. But if it's a Journey Guarantee, a Journey Protection Guarantee candidate, there would be no other financial situation. So I know that's it's not a clear-cut answer, but it really does involve our screening processes and which program you're in at the same time.
Okay, thank you, Tony. A question from Carissa. Do you work in partnership with donor concierge agencies? I mean, agencies that will search the wider network of surrogacy agencies to match surrogates with IPs for a finder's fee. So we have partnering agencies that we work with as part of our donor pool. So we have our own donor agency, and then we have 3 other partnering agencies that you can connect with to look at their pool as well. If you're seeking services like a program such as Donor Concierge, that would be something that you would do outside of Circle to help you find your specific donor. And my last question is, could you tell us about any conflicts you've had with IPs in the past? I'm just curious to know what to expect during the process. Conflicts that we've had with IPs.
That's a good question, and it's one that I am very proud to say that Circle has never been sued by an intended parent. Circle has never been sued by a gestational carrier. I kind of went right to the worst case scenario there. I think what the conflicts you may anticipate are the exact reason why you have an entire team assigned to you with Circle. When you join us, you have an attorney, you have a social worker, you have a program coordinator, you have a supervising coordinator, you have an accountant, and everyone is working to ensure that you have a smooth journey. And your surrogate as well has a team assigned to her. So I'm not unrealistic in thinking that conflicts may happen. I'm very proud to say that we have resolved all of the conflicts that we've had, and we've never had those serious worst case scenario conflicts.
Thank you, Tony. Well, we've reached the end of our Q&A. I want to thank our speakers today, and obviously thank those who have joined us. We hope that we've been able to answer some of your preliminary questions. Please feel free to connect with us after this webinar. We'll be sending out a follow-up email, so you could certainly reach back out and set up consultations with either of our teams. We're happy to help you move forward. Thank you very much, Tony and Dr. G, for joining us today.
Thank you so much, Jen.
Take care, everyone. Be safe and be well. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.